I'm Daniel. I'm a project manager, a husband, a son, a guy who believes in hard work. It's not just a catchy phrase or some motivational poster slogan. It's the bedrock of my existence, the guiding principle that shapes every single decision I make. It's how I was raised, hammered into me by my dad, a man who worked his fingers to the bone to provide for our family. He wasn't a big talker, my dad, but he led by example. He'd come home from his construction job, covered in dust and sweat, and still find the energy to help me with my homework or coach my little league baseball team. He taught me the value of perseverance, the importance of showing up even when you're exhausted, and the unwavering belief that if you put in the effort, you'll reap the rewards. Son, he'd say, his voice rough but gentle, nothing worthwhile comes easy. You gotta earn it. That lesson became my mantra, the engine that drives me, the fuel that keeps me going even when I feel like I'm running on empty. It's the philosophy I've applied to every facet of my life, from my education to my career, and now to my marriage. Sarah and I have been married for 4 years. We met in college, a classic story of shared classes, late-night study sessions fueled by copious amounts of coffee, and that instant, undeniable spark. She was everything I wasn't: artistic, spontaneous, a free spirit who embraced life with a contagious enthusiasm. I was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. She challenged me, pushed me out of my comfort zone, and made me believe that anything was possible. We fell hard and fast, a whirlwind romance that culminated in a beautiful wedding overlooking Lake Michigan. Those early years were magical. We spent hours talking, dreaming about our future, making plans for a family, a house in the suburbs, all the traditional milestones of a happy life. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The reality of marriage, the day-to-day grind of balancing careers and responsibilities, slowly chipped away at that initial euphoria. We're still figuring out the rhythm of married life, I guess. It's not as simple as I thought it would be. It's not just about love and passion. It's about communication, compromise, and constantly readjusting to the ever-changing dynamics of a relationship. And honestly, I'm not sure I'm very good at any of those things. I love her, no doubt about that, and I want to give her the best life I can. That's why I push myself so hard. I want her to have everything she's ever dreamed of. I want to give her the financial security and comfort that I never had growing up. I want her to be happy. I want to be the husband she deserves. Every morning, the alarm clock screams at 5 a.m., a jarring interruption to my already limited sleep. I hit the snooze button a couple of times, trying to steal a few more precious minutes, but the guilt starts to creep in. I know I need to get up, need to get to the office, need to tackle the mountain of work waiting for me. I roll over, careful not to disturb Sarah, and place a quick kiss on her forehead. She stirs slightly, a soft sigh escaping her lips, and then settles back into sleep. I watch her for a moment, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the way her hair falls across her face. She looks so peaceful when she's sleeping, so carefree. Those quiet moments before the day begins are precious. They remind me of why I do what I do, why I sacrifice so much. Then I slip out of bed, get ready in the dark, and head out the door, leaving her sleeping soundly. By the time I get home in the evenings, I'm usually exhausted, both physically and mentally. The demands of my job as a project manager at a tech company in Chicago are relentless. Deadlines, meetings, budgets, personnel issues, it's a constant barrage. I'm too drained to do much more than eat a quick dinner, take a shower, and collapse in a bed. I often fall asleep before Sarah even comes to bed, leaving her alone in the quiet apartment. I know it's not ideal. I know I should be spending more time with her, talking to her, connecting with her, but the pressure at work is immense. I keep telling myself that if I can just land this next promotion, things will ease up. I'll have more time, more flexibility. We'll finally take that trip to Europe she's always wanted. We'll start a family. It's all part of the plan. At least, that's what I tell myself. When I'm not working, I try to compensate for the lost time. Weekend trips to the lake, fancy dinners downtown, surprise gifts, little things I hope will show her how much I care. I know I'm not always the most affectionate guy. I'm not good with words. Showing my love through actions feels more natural to me. I remember when we first started dating, I'd surprise her with flowers at her office or tickets to her favorite band. I'd plan elaborate dates, taking her to art galleries, or exploring new restaurants. Those were the days. Everything felt so easy, so effortless. Now life just feels complicated. I'm so focused on providing for her, on building a secure future for us, that I sometimes forget to focus on the present. I'm so busy trying to give her the world that I'm neglecting the simple things, the everyday moments that make a relationship strong. But over the past few months, something has shifted. Sarah started feeling distant. It's subtle, but it's there. A coolness in her eyes, a forced politeness in her voice. She's quieter than usual, spending more time alone, lost in her own world. At first, I thought she was just stressed. She's a marketing executive, and her job is just as demanding as mine. She often works late herself, so I understand the pressure. I didn't press her about it. I hate confrontation. I'm not good at talking about feelings. I thought if I just keep showing her how much I care, everything will go back to normal. I was wrong. I was so busy trying to fix things with grand gestures that I missed the small, everyday moments that were slipping away. I was so focused on the future that I was losing the present. I was so sure I knew what she wanted that I never stopped to ask. I was so caught up in my own world, my own ambitions, that I failed to see the growing distance between us, the silent cries for help that I was too preoccupied to hear. The feeling of unease that had been simmering beneath the surface of my life with Sarah was now boiling over. It wasn't just a nagging worry anymore. It was a full-blown panic, a cold dread that settled deep in my bones. Sarah's distance had become a chasm, a vast, unbridgeable gulf that stretched between us, separating us not just physically, but emotionally. Her smiles were rare, her laughter a distant memory, replaced by a forced politeness that felt colder than indifference. She moved through our apartment like a ghost, a silent presence that I could feel but not touch. She was there, but she wasn't there with me. It was like she had already left, mentally and emotionally, leaving only a shell of the woman I had fallen in love with. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a phase, a temporary blip in our otherwise happy marriage. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The easy intimacy we once shared, the effortless connection that had defined our relationship, had vanished, replaced by an awkwardness, a constant tension that hung heavy in the air between us. I became obsessed with trying to figure out what was happening, analyzing every interaction, scrutinizing her every move. I was like a detective searching for clues, desperate to understand what I had done wrong, what I could do to fix it. I noticed she was spending an inordinate amount of time on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with a speed and dexterity that she never seemed to display when she was interacting with me. Her face would light up with a smile, a genuine, radiant smile that I hadn't seen directed at me in months. And then, as soon as I entered the room, the smile would vanish, replaced by a neutral, almost guarded expression. She quickly put her phone away, a furtive, almost guilty gesture that fueled my suspicions. Who was she talking to? What could be so captivating, so absorbing, that it could draw her so completely away from me? Was she confiding in someone else, sharing her thoughts and feelings with a stranger while I was left in the dark? The questions swirled in my mind, feeding my insecurities, amplifying my fear that I was losing her. One evening, I decided to try a different tactic. Instead of working late, as I usually did, I left the office early, hoping to surprise Sarah with a quiet evening at home. I picked up a bottle of her favorite Sauvignon Blanc and some takeout from the little Italian place in our neighborhood that she loved. I imagined us curled up on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine, talking about our day, reconnecting in the way we used to. I walked in the door, expecting to find her in the living room, maybe reading or watching TV. But the apartment was empty. The silence was deafening. A note lay on the kitchen counter, weighted down by a ceramic coaster. "Out with friends," it read, scrawled in her handwriting. "Out with friends." The words echoed in my head, a hollow, mocking sound that amplified my growing sense of isolation. I felt a pang of disappointment, a sharp stab of loneliness, followed by a wave of anger. I had gone out of my way to plan a special evening for us, to show her that I was thinking of her, and she was out with friends. It wasn't that I begrudged her having a social life. It was the fact that she hadn't even mentioned it to me, hadn't thought to include me. It was the casualness of the note, the lack of any explanation or apology, that stung the most. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the note, my mind racing with unanswered questions, my imagination conjuring up images of her laughing and having fun with other people, people who seemed to matter more to her than I did. Who were these friends? Why hadn't she told me she was going out? Was she deliberately avoiding me? Was she trying to send me a message? The next few weeks were a blur of work, worry, and growing resentment. I threw myself into my work, working even longer hours than usual, driven by a desperate need to prove myself, to achieve the success I thought would fix everything. I believed that if I could just climb the corporate ladder, if I could just provide Sarah with the life she deserved, she would come back to me. But the harder I worked, the more distant Sarah became. It was a vicious cycle, a self-fulfilling prophecy. I was so busy trying to provide for her materially that I was neglecting her emotional needs, pushing her further and further away. I felt like I was losing her, watching her slip through my fingers like sand, and I didn't know how to stop it. I tried to talk to her a few times, to broach the subject of her distance, but she brushed me off, saying she was just tired or stressed from work. She avoided eye contact. Her responses were short and dismissive, and I could feel the wall she was building between us, brick by painful brick. I started to resent her for it, for shutting me out, for making me feel like I was the one to blame, like I was the reason for her unhappiness. I started to resent her friends, whoever they were, for taking her away from me, for filling the void that I couldn't seem to fill. I even started to resent her for making me feel this way, this constant ache in my chest, this gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong, that my world was about to shatter. One Friday night, we were supposed to go to a party at a friend's house. It was an event we had been planning to attend for weeks, a chance to catch up with old friends, to let loose and have some fun. I came home from work, exhausted as usual, but determined to make an effort. I wanted to show Sarah that I cared, that I was trying to be a better husband. I got dressed, put on my best cologne, and waited for her to get ready. But she stayed in the bedroom, the door firmly closed. I could hear her moving around, but she didn't come out. After a while, I knocked on the door. "Honey, are you almost ready?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, but I could feel the frustration building inside me. "I'm not feeling up to it," she said through the door, her voice muffled. "I think I'm just going to stay in tonight." I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, rising up from the pit of my stomach. "Seriously, Sarah?" I said, my voice rising, the carefully constructed facade of calm cracking. "We've been planning this for weeks. Everyone's expecting us." "I'm tired, Daniel," she replied, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "I don't feel like socializing." "That's your excuse for everything these days," I snapped, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "You're always tired. You're always stressed. You never want to do anything anymore." There was a moment of tense silence. Then she said, her voice cold, cutting, "Maybe I'm just tired of pretending." "Pretending what?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest, a terrible premonition settling over me. "Pretending that everything's okay," she said. "Pretending that we're happy." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I stood there, stunned, unable to speak, the reality of what she was saying crashing down on me. "What are you saying, Sarah?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper, the question hanging in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. She opened the door, her eyes filled with tears, but her expression was resolute, determined. "I'm saying," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm, "that I can't do this anymore, Daniel. I can't pretend that I'm happy. I can't pretend that I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and jagged, like shards of glass, cutting through the carefully constructed facade of our life together. "I can't pretend that I'm in love with you." They echoed in my mind, a relentless, repeating mantra of failure. Each repetition was a fresh wound, a deeper cut into the already bleeding heart of our relationship. I stared at Sarah, her face a complex tapestry of emotions, sadness, regret, but most prominently, a chilling resolve. The tears glistening in her eyes didn't soften her expression. They seemed to solidify it, giving her a strength, a finality, that made her seem more distant, more unreachable than ever before. It was like looking at a stranger, a woman I had never truly known. I felt a wave of dizziness, a sudden disorientation, as if the ground had just shifted beneath my feet, leaving me teetering on the edge of an abyss. I reached out instinctively to touch her arm, a desperate plea for connection, for reassurance, but she flinched, pulling away as if my touch burned her. The rejection stung, a small, sharp pain added to the larger, gaping wound in my heart. It was a physical manifestation of the emotional chasm that had grown between us, a chasm I had been too blind to see, too stubborn to acknowledge. What are you saying?" I stammered, my voice thick with disbelief, the words struggling to form in my throat. It was as if my mind was refusing to accept the reality of the situation, clinging to the remnants of a dream that was rapidly turning into a nightmare. "I'm saying that I'm not in love with you anymore, Daniel," she repeated, her voice flat, devoid of any warmth or affection. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a chilling calmness that made it all the more devastating. I haven't been for a while. A wave of nausea washed over me, a physical manifestation of the emotional turmoil churning inside me. I felt like I was going to be sick, the room spinning around me, the walls closing in. I stumbled back, as if she had physically pushed me away, the invisible force of her rejection pushing me back, forcing me to confront the truth. But why?" I asked, the question escaping my lips before I could stop it. Why? The most fundamental, yet most unanswerable question in the universe. The question that has plagued humanity since the dawn of time. It was a desperate plea for understanding, a futile attempt to make sense of the senseless. "It's not one thing, Daniel," she said, her voice weary, as if she had rehearsed these words 1,000 times, as if she had been carrying this burden for far too long. "It's a lot of things. It's the way we've drifted apart, the way we've become strangers in our own home. It's the way you're always working, always focused on the future, never present in the moment. It's the way you never really see me, not really. You see an image of me, an idea of me, but you don't see me. It's the lack of connection, the lack of intimacy, the lack of passion, the lack of everything." Her words were like a litany of my failures, each one a hammer blow to my already fragile ego, each one a confirmation of my deepest fears. I felt exposed, vulnerable, stripped bare of all my defenses. I had been so busy trying to be the perfect husband, the perfect provider, that I had forgotten to be a husband, a partner, a friend. I had been so focused on building a future for us that I had neglected the present, the here and now, the very foundation of our relationship. "So what? Is that it?" I asked, my voice laced with bitterness, the anger starting to simmer beneath the surface of my hurt. "You're just going to walk away? After everything we've been through? After everything I've done for you?" "Done for me?" she repeated, her voice rising, a flicker of anger igniting in her eyes. "You think you've done things for me, Daniel? Or have you done them for yourself? Have you ever stopped to consider what I want, what I need? You're so busy providing for me, so busy building this perfect future, that you've completely forgotten about the present. You've forgotten about me. You've forgotten that I'm a person with my own dreams, my own aspirations, my own needs. You've treated me like a project, like another item on your to-do list, another goal to achieve. But I'm not a project, Daniel. I'm a person, and I'm tired of being treated like anything less." Her words were like a slap in the face, a brutal wake-up call. I had been so focused on my own agenda, so convinced that I knew what was best for her, that I had completely ignored her own needs and desires. I had been so busy building a future for us that I had destroyed our present. I had been so blind to her pain, so deaf to her cries for help. "So, what are you going to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the question heavy with dread. "I'm leaving, Daniel," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I'm moving out." "Moving out?" I repeated, the words echoing in my head, a death knell to our marriage, a final, irrevocable separation. "Where are you going to go?" "I found a place," she said. "A small apartment downtown. It's time for me to start over, to find myself again, to figure out who I am and what I want. It's time for me to be free. Start over," I said, my voice rising in disbelief, a desperate attempt to cling to the remnants of our past. Find yourself? What about us? What about our vows? What about our future? "There is no us anymore, Daniel," she said, her voice cold and final, cutting off any hope I still harbored. "There is no future. Not for us." She turned and walked back into the bedroom, leaving me standing there alone in the living room, the silence broken only by the pounding of my heart, the heavy weight of my grief. I felt numb, disconnected, like I was watching this scene unfold from a distance, like it wasn't really happening to me. But it was. Sarah was leaving me. Our marriage was over. The foundation of my life, the bedrock of my existence, had just crumbled. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands, trying to process what had just happened, trying to make sense of the chaos that had just engulfed my life. I felt a wave of grief so intense that it took my breath away, a deep, visceral pain that resonated in every fiber of my being. I had lost her. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my life around, was gone. And it was my fault. I had been so busy trying to be the provider, the protector, the perfect husband, that I had forgotten to be the one thing she needed most present. I had been so focused on the future that I had destroyed our present. I had been so sure I knew what she wanted that I had never bothered to ask. I had failed her. I had failed our marriage. I had failed myself. The anger that I had felt earlier dissipated, replaced by a deep, aching sadness, a profound sense of loss. I wanted to cry, to release the torrent of emotions that were threatening to drown me, but I couldn't. I felt empty, hollow, like a part of me had died. I sat there for a long time, lost in my thoughts, the silence of the apartment amplifying my despair, the stillness of the room a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. I didn't know what to do, where to go, how to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. I felt lost, adrift, alone, cast adrift on a sea of grief and regret. The world I had known, the world I had carefully constructed, had just come crashing down around me. And I was left standing in the ruins, wondering how I could ever rebuild, wondering if I even wanted to. The days that followed Sarah's departure were a surreal, disorienting blur, a chaotic mix of logistical nightmares and raw, gut-wrenching emotional pain. Sarah had moved out quickly, efficiently, as if she had been planning this for a long time. She took the essentials, clothes, a few personal items, her art supplies. The apartment, once a vibrant reflection of our life together, now felt cavernous and empty, a hollow echo chamber of memories. Every corner held a ghost of her presence. The indentation on the couch where she used to sit, the lingering scent of her perfume, the half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table. Every object was a painful reminder of what I had lost, a tangible symbol of the future that would never be. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the laughter and conversations that once filled the space. It was broken only by the ticking of the clock, a relentless, rhythmic reminder of the passage of time, the cruel, indifferent march of time that seemed to mock my pain, to emphasize the emptiness that had taken root in my life. I moved through the days in a fog, a detached observer of my own life. I went to work, performed my duties, attended meetings, but I felt utterly disconnected, like I was going through the motions, a robot on autopilot. Work, which had always been my sanctuary, my escape, now felt like a prison, a place where I was forced to confront the reality of my situation, the stark contrast between the professional success I had achieved and the profound personal failure that had shattered my life. Evenings were the worst. I dreaded going home, dreading the silence, dreading the memories that clung to every corner of the apartment like cobwebs. I tried to distract myself, filling my evenings with meaningless activities, late nights at the office, ostensibly working, but really just trying to avoid the emptiness of my own home. Pointless errands, driving around aimlessly just to be out of the apartment. Aimless walks through the city streets, observing the lives of others, feeling like an outsider looking in. I started eating out more, grabbing takeout on my way home from work, or meeting friends for dinner, anything to avoid the solitude of my kitchen, the ghost of Sarah's presence at the dining table. I even started going to the gym, a desperate attempt to exhaust myself physically, hoping that the physical exertion would help me sleep, would numb the emotional pain that throbbed in my chest like a persistent ache. But nothing worked. The emptiness followed me everywhere, a constant shadow, a dark cloud that I couldn't shake. It was like a part of me was missing, a vital organ had been removed, leaving a gaping hole in my soul. Sleep became a nightly battleground. I would lie awake for hours, my mind racing, replaying every moment of our relationship, every conversation, every fight, every perceived slight. I would analyze every detail, searching for clues, for answers, for some explanation that would make sense of it all, that would justify Sarah's decision to leave. But there were no answers, only more questions, more doubts, more recriminations. Why hadn't I seen it coming? Why hadn't I listened to her? Why had I been so blind to her pain, so deaf to her unspoken needs? The guilt was a heavy weight, crushing me, suffocating me, making it difficult to breathe. I would drift off to sleep eventually, exhausted but not rested, only to be jolted awake by nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams of Sarah leaving me, of her being with someone else, of me being alone, utterly and irrevocably alone, adrift in a sea of despair. I tried to talk to friends, to confide in them, to seek their advice and support. But it was hard. How do you explain the collapse of your marriage, the shattering of your dreams, to someone who has never experienced it? How do you articulate the depth of your pain, the overwhelming sense of loss, the crushing weight of guilt? I found myself stumbling over words, unable to express the complex, conflicting emotions that were churning inside me. I felt like a failure, a burden, a broken man, unworthy of their time and attention. I started to withdraw from my friends, isolating myself, convinced that they didn't want to hear about my problems, that they couldn't possibly understand the depth of my suffering. I built a wall around myself, a protective barrier against further hurt, further rejection. One night, I found myself at a bar, nursing a beer, lost in my thoughts, trying to drown my sorrows in the bottom of a glass. The place was crowded, noisy, the air thick with the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke. I watched the people around me, laughing, talking, flirting, their faces animated, their voices filled with life. They seemed so carefree, so happy, so untouched by the pain that was consuming me. I felt a pang of envy, a longing for the carefree days when I could enjoy a night out without the weight of the world on my shoulders, before I had known the crushing weight of heartbreak. I finished my beer and ordered another, the alcohol numbing the pain, blurring the edges of my despair, offering a temporary respite from the relentless thoughts that plagued me. I was on my third beer, starting to feel the familiar buzz of intoxication, when I saw her. She was sitting at the bar, alone, her head down, her long blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, shielding her face from view. She looked up, as if sensing my gaze, and our eyes met. It was Sarah. My heart skipped a beat, a jolt of electricity surging through my body. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, shock, disbelief, anger, sadness, longing, a desperate yearning to hold her, to touch her, to bring her back. I wanted to run over to her, to wrap my arms around her, to tell her how much I missed her, how much I loved her, how much I regretted everything. But I hesitated, paralyzed by fear, by doubt, by the weight of my past mistakes. What would I say? What could I say? She had made it clear that she was done, that there was no going back, that the bridge between us had been burned to ashes. I watched her for a while, my mind racing, my emotions swirling like a tempest. She looked different, thinner, her eyes shadowed with fatigue, a vulnerability that I had rarely seen before. But she was still beautiful, still the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had lost. I finished my beer and got up, my legs unsteady, my head spinning from the alcohol and the emotional turmoil. I walked over to her, my heart pounding in my chest, each step bringing me closer to the inevitable confrontation, the inevitable pain. "Sarah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the sound lost in the din of the bar. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise, a flicker of recognition. Then something else, something unreadable, crossing her face. "Daniel," she said, her voice hesitant, guarded. "What are you doing here?" The question hung in the air between us, thick with unspoken words, heavy with the weight of our shared history. "What are you doing here?" It wasn't just a simple inquiry about my presence in the bar. It was a loaded question, a subtle accusation, a reminder of the pain I had caused, the trust one had broken. I stood there, frozen, caught in the headlights of her gaze, unsure how to respond. The noise of the bar, the clatter of glasses, the murmur of conversations, faded into the background, as if the world had suddenly shrunk to encompass only Sarah and me. All I could see was her face, pale and drawn, her eyes a mixture of surprise, apprehension, and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. It was a look that both attracted and repelled me, a look that held the promise of connection and the threat of rejection. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, a jumble of regrets, hopes, and fears. What could I say? That I was here to win her back? That I had suddenly seen the error of my ways and was ready to change, to become the man she deserved? That I couldn't live without her? That the emptiness she had left behind was a gaping hole in my soul? The words felt hollow, meaningless, a pathetic attempt to undo the damage I had done, to erase the past with a few well-chosen phrases. They would sound like empty promises, the same promises I had made before, promises I had failed to keep. I saw you. I finally managed to stammer, my voice hoarse, the words catching in my throat, betraying my nervousness. It was a lame excuse, a pathetic attempt to explain my presence, a transparent lie that she could see right through. But it was all I could come up with in that moment, my mind blank, my thoughts scattered. "I didn't know you were here." It was the truth, technically. I hadn't known she would be here, in this particular bar, on this particular night. But the unspoken truth was that I had been searching for her, not actively, but passively, always scanning the crowds, always hoping for a glimpse of her, always holding onto a sliver of hope that we could somehow find our way back to each other. "I'm meeting a friend," she said, her voice cool, distant, as if she was talking to a stranger, a casual acquaintance. "She's running late." She glanced at her watch, a subtle dismissal, a clear indication that she wasn't interested in prolonging this conversation, that she wanted me to leave. The gesture stung, a small, sharp pain added to the larger, aching wound in my heart. I felt a surge of anger, a flash of resentment at her coldness, her indifference, her ability to dismiss me so easily. But I pushed it down, reminding myself that I was the one who had messed up, that I had no right to be angry with her, that I had forfeited any claim to her warmth and affection. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice pleading, the desperation creeping in. "Just for a few minutes? Please." I knew it was a risk, exposing myself to further rejection, further pain, but I couldn't help myself. I had to try, had to make one last attempt to reach her, to connect with her, to understand what had gone wrong. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine, as if trying to gauge my sincerity, my intentions, trying to see if I was truly contrite or just putting on an act. I held her gaze, trying to convey the depth of my regret, the sincerity of my desire to understand what had gone wrong, what I could do to fix it. After a long, agonizing moment, she sighed, a weary, resigned sound that spoke volumes about her exhaustion, her disillusionment, her acceptance of the reality of our situation. "Fine," she said, her voice resigned, lacking any warmth or enthusiasm. "But just for a few minutes." I pulled up a stool next to her, my heart pounding in my chest, a mixture of hope and fear coursing through my veins. I was close to her again, physically close, but the emotional distance between us felt vast, insurmountable. We sat in silence for a moment, the awkwardness palpable, the weight of our shared history pressing down on us, suffocating us. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to bridge the physical distance between us, to reassure myself that she was real, that she was still within reach. But I didn't dare. I was afraid of her rejection, afraid of the pain it would cause, afraid of shattering the fragile truce that had settled between us. "How are you?" I finally asked, the words sounding stilted, unnatural, as if I was talking to a stranger. "I'm fine," she said, her voice flat, her eyes fixed on the glass of water in her hand, avoiding my gaze. "How are you?" I'm not fine," I admitted, my voice cracking with emotion, the carefully constructed facade of composure crumbling. "I miss you, Sarah. I miss us." She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and pity, a look that made me feel even worse. "I know," she said softly, her voice laced with a hint of regret. "I miss us too. But it's over, Daniel. We both know that." "But why?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me for weeks, the question that I desperately needed to answer, the question that I knew she couldn't fully answer. "Why did you leave? What did I do wrong?" She sighed, a deep, weary sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, a sigh that spoke of exhaustion, of resignation, of a pain that ran deep. "It's not about blame, Daniel," she said, her voice patient but firm. "It's not about what you did or didn't do. It's about us, about who we are, about what we want, about the fundamental incompatibility that we had tried to ignore for so long. We've grown apart, Daniel. We've become different people with different dreams, different aspirations, different needs. We want different things from life, from each other. But can't we fix it?" I pleaded, the desperation rising in my voice, the hope flickering in my heart. "Can we try again? I'm willing to change, Sarah. I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want, what you need, and I'll give it to you. I promise." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, as if trying to see into my soul, trying to discern the truth from the desperation. "I don't know, Daniel," she said, her voice soft, uncertain, laced with doubt. "I don't know if it's possible. We've both been hurt, deeply hurt, and those wounds take time to heal, if they ever truly heal. I need time, Daniel. Time to figure things out, to figure out who I am, what I want, what I need. I need time to heal." "But what about us?" I asked, my voice desperate, clinging to the last vestiges of hope. "What about our future? What about the life we plan together?" "I don't know about the future, Daniel," she said, her voice filled with sadness, a hint of finality. "All I know is that I can't stay in the past. I can't keep pretending that we can go back to the way things were. I need to move on, to find my own happiness, even if that means moving on without you." She looked at her watch again, a clear signal that our time was up, that the conversation was over. "I should go," she said, getting up from her stool, her movements decisive, final. "My friend is probably wondering where I am." I stood up too, my heart sinking, the weight of her words crushing me. "Can I see you again?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, a last, desperate plea. She hesitated, her expression unreadable, then nodded slowly, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Maybe," she said, her voice noncommittal. "But not now, Daniel. I need some time. I need some space." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, alone in the crowded bar, the noise and the laughter washing over me, but unable to penetrate the wall of sadness, the wall of regret, the wall of loneliness that surrounded me. I watched her go, my heart aching, my mind filled with questions, doubts, and a tiny, flickering ember of hope that refused to be extinguished. Sarah's maybe hung in the air between us like a fragile lifeline, a thin thread of hope in the vast, desolate landscape of my post-breakup existence. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a definitive no either. It was a sliver of possibility, a glimmer of light in the darkness, and I clung to it with a desperation that bordered on obsession. I replayed our conversation in my mind countless times, analyzing every word, every nuance, every fleeting expression on her face. I dissected her tone, her body language, searching for hidden meanings, for any indication that she might still harbor some feelings for me, that there was still a chance for us. She had agreed to see me again, but not now. She needed time, space. I understood, or at least I tried to. I knew I had hurt her, deeply, irrevocably, and that healing took time, a long, arduous process that I had no right to rush. But the uncertainty was agonizing, the waiting a constant torture. It was like being suspended in limbo, caught between the hope of reconciliation and the fear of final rejection. I wanted to call her, to text her, to bombard her with messages of love and regret, to beg her to give me another chance, to prove to her that I had changed. But I knew that would only push her further away, that it would confirm her belief that I was still the same selfish, inconsiderate man she had left. I had to respect her wishes, give her the space she needed, even if it meant enduring the agony of separation, the constant gnawing of doubt, the fear that she was moving on, that she was forgetting me. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, each one dragging by with agonizing slowness. I threw myself into work with a vengeance, trying to bury the pain, to distract myself from the constant ache in my heart, the emptiness that had taken root in my soul. I worked longer hours than ever before, volunteering for extra projects, taking on new responsibilities, anything to keep my mind occupied, to avoid the silence of my empty apartment, the constant reminders of Sarah's absence. I became a workaholic, a ghost of my former self, a shadow moving through the motions of life, a machine driven by deadlines and deliverables, devoid of joy, devoid of purpose. I lost weight. My clothes hung loose on my frame. My eyes were shadowed with fatigue. My smile a distant memory, a relic of a happier time. My friends worried about me. They saw the toll the breakup was taking on me, but I brushed off their concerns, assuring them that I was fine, that I was just going through a rough patch, that I just needed some time to get back on my feet. But I wasn't fine. I was broken, lost, adrift in a sea of grief and regret, struggling to stay afloat, clinging to the hope that Sarah would throw me a lifeline. One evening, I was working late at the office. As usual, the glow of the computer screen reflecting in my tired eyes, when I received a text message. The notification tone startled me, breaking through the fog of concentration that I had been desperately trying to maintain. I glanced at my phone, and my heart skipped a beat. It was from Sarah. "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow?" it read. The simple question sent a jolt of electricity through my body, a surge of hope, a sudden rush of adrenaline. It was the first contact she had initiated since our encounter at the bar, and it felt like a sign, a glimmer of possibility. I texted back immediately, my fingers trembling slightly. "Yes, of course. Where and when?" "How about the cafe on Oak Street?" 10 a.m., she replied. "Perfect." I typed back, my mind already racing, imagining all sorts of scenarios, all sorts of outcomes. Would she tell me she was ready to come back? Would she tell me she had moved on? Would she tell me she never wanted to see me again? The uncertainty was agonizing, the anticipation almost unbearable. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I imagined all sorts of conversations, all sorts of possibilities. I rehearsed what I would say to her, the apologies I would offer, the promises I would make. I pictured her face, her smile, her eyes, trying to conjure up the image of her that I had fallen in love with, the woman who had filled my life with joy and laughter. But the image was blurred, distorted by the pain and the regret, by the weight of the past. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe early, my nerves on edge, my stomach churning with anticipation and dread. I ordered a coffee and sat at a table by the window, watching the people pass by, trying to distract myself from the thoughts that were swirling in my mind, the emotions that were threatening to overwhelm me. I felt like I was waiting for a job interview, or a doctor's appointment, or some other momentous occasion that would determine the course of my future. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, looking beautiful, as always. She was wearing a simple dress that accentuated her figure, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes bright, but there was a hint of nervousness in her expression, a slight hesitation in her movements. She smiled tentatively, a small, hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a smile that was a far cry from the radiant smile she used to greet me with. "Hi, Daniel," she said, her voice soft, almost tentative. "Hi, Sarah," I replied, my voice hoarse, betraying my anxiety. We sat in silence for a moment, the awkwardness palpable, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy in the air between us, like an invisible barrier. "How are you?" I finally asked, the question that had been on my mind for months, the question that I had been dying to ask her. I'm doing okay," she said, her voice hesitant, her eyes darting away from mine. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of soul-searching. I've been trying to figure out who I am, what I want from life, what I need to be happy." "And?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, as if trying to gauge my reaction, my expectations, trying to prepare me for what she was about to say. "I've realized that I need to make some changes in my life," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I need to focus on myself, on my own happiness, on my own well-being. I need to be true to myself, to my own needs, to my own desires." I felt a pang of disappointment, a sinking feeling in my stomach, a premonition of what was to come. I knew, deep down, what she was going to say, but I still clung to the hope that I was wrong, that I had misinterpreted her words. "I've met someone," she continued, her voice soft, almost apologetic, but her eyes unwavering, her expression resolute. "Someone who makes me feel alive, someone who sees me, who understands me, someone who appreciates me for who I am, not for who he wants me to be." The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the wind out of me. I felt a wave of nausea, a sudden dizziness, the room spinning around me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg her to come back to me, to tell her that I would change, that I would be the man she wanted, that I would do anything for her. But I couldn't. I just sat there numb, my heart breaking into a million pieces, the reality of her words crushing me. "I'm happy for you," I finally managed to say, my voice hollow, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, a bitter acknowledgement of my defeat. I just want you to be happy." It was the truth, or at least a part of it. I didn't want her to be happy, even if it meant that she couldn't be happy with me. But the thought of her being happy with someone else, of her finding love and fulfillment with another man, was like a knife twisting in my heart. She smiled sadly, a mixture of gratitude and regret in her eyes. "Thank you, Daniel," she said, her voice soft, almost compassionate. "That means a lot to me." We sat in silence for a few more minutes, the unspoken words hanging heavy between us, the weight of our shared past, the pain of our present, the uncertainty of our future. Then she got up to leave, her movements decisive, final. "I should go," she said, her voice gentle, but firm. "I have to meet him." I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with emotion. She leaned down and kissed me on the cheek, a light, fleeting kiss that felt like a goodbye, a final farewell. "Take care of yourself, Daniel," she said, her voice soft, almost tender. "I'll always care about you." And then she was gone. The cafe seemed to shrink around me, the clatter of cups and saucers, the murmur of conversations, the cheerful background music. All of it suddenly felt intrusive, a jarring intrusion on the quiet devastation unfolding within me. I sat there, numb, the empty chair across from me a stark reminder of Sarah's absence, the ghost of her presence lingering in the air, a phantom touch on my skin. Her words, "I've met someone," echoed in my mind, a death knell to the last vestiges of hope I had been desperately clinging to. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the casual, almost offhand way she had delivered them, as if she was telling me about a new acquaintance, not the man who had replaced me in her life, the man who had become the recipient of the love and affection that I had so desperately craved. It was over. Truly, irrevocably over. The fragile thread of hope that I had been clinging to, the maybe that had sustained me through the long, lonely months of separation, had been finally and definitively severed, leaving me adrift in a vast, empty ocean of despair. I left the cafe in a daze, the bright sunlight assaulting my eyes, the city noises a jarring cacophony. I walked aimlessly, my feet carrying me through the familiar streets of Chicago, past the places we used to frequent, the restaurants where we had celebrated anniversaries, the parks where we had strolled hand in hand, the theaters where we had shared laughter and tears. Each landmark was a painful reminder of what I had lost, a sharp stab of nostalgia, a fresh wave of grief. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, regret, confusion, a profound sense of loss that threatened to consume me. I thought about Sarah, about the life we had built together, the dreams we had shared, the future we had so carefully planned. I thought about my own role in the demise of our marriage, my blindness to her needs, my selfishness, my obsession with work, my inability to see her, to truly see her, to understand her, to appreciate her. The guilt was a heavy weight, crushing me, suffocating me, making it difficult to breathe. I wandered for hours, lost in my thoughts, my emotions swirling like a tempest, until I found myself at the lakefront, a place of solace and reflection for many Chicagoans. I sat on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan, the waves lapping gently against the shore, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink, painting the sky with breathtaking beauty. The tranquility of the scene, the vastness of the lake, the beauty of the sunset, did little to soothe my troubled soul. The beauty felt mocking, a cruel contrast to the turmoil within me. I felt a deep, aching loneliness, a sense of isolation that was both profound and terrifying. I was alone, truly alone. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my life around, the woman I had imagined spending the rest of my life with, was gone. And she was with someone else. The thought was like a knife twisting in my heart. As I sat there, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could succumb to the grief. I could let the pain consume me. I could wallow in self-pity and regret. I could drown in the sea of despair. Or I could let go. I could accept the reality of the situation, accept that Sarah was gone, that our marriage was over, that the future I had envisioned was no more. I could forgive myself for my mistakes, I could learn from them, and I could move on. I could choose to heal. The decision wasn't easy. Letting go meant accepting the pain, embracing the grief, acknowledging the loss. It meant facing my own demons, confronting my own shortcomings, admitting my own failures. It meant dismantling the carefully constructed image of myself that I had clung to for so long, the image of the successful, hard-working man who had it all figured out. It was a painful process, a humbling experience, a journey into the darkest corners of my own soul. But it was also necessary. It was the only way to break free from the shackles of the past, to release myself from the burden of guilt and regret, to open myself up to the possibility of a new future. I took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling my lungs, and I made my choice. I chose to let go. I chose to forgive myself. I chose to move on. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, a miraculous transformation. It was a gradual process, a slow, painful, and often messy journey of healing and self-discovery. There were days when the grief was overwhelming, when the memories were too painful to bear, when the loneliness was suffocating. There were nights when I would wake up in a cold sweat, haunted by dreams of Sarah, tormented by regrets, consumed by self-doubt. But I kept going one step at a time, one day at a time, clinging to the belief that things would get better, that the pain would eventually subside, that I would eventually find peace. I started to reconnect with my friends, to rebuild the relationships that I had neglected during my marriage, to lean on their support and guidance. I started to take care of myself, to eat healthy, to exercise regularly, to get enough sleep. I started to explore new interests, to rediscover old passions, to find new ways to fill the emptiness in my life. I joined a hiking group, rekindled my love for photography, started taking a cooking class. Slowly, gradually, the pain began to subside. The memories of Sarah didn't disappear, but they lost their sharp edges, their power to wound. The guilt and regret didn't vanish entirely, but they became less oppressive, less consuming. I started to see my own role in the demise of our marriage more clearly, without the blinders of self-pity and denial. I started to understand that Sarah's decision to leave wasn't a rejection of me, but a reflection of her own needs, her own desires, her own journey. I started to forgive her, and more importantly, I started to forgive myself. The future was still uncertain, but it was no longer a source of fear and anxiety. It was a blank canvas, a new beginning, an opportunity to create a new life, a life that was true to myself, a life that was filled with joy, meaning, and purpose. I didn't know what the future held, but I was ready to face it with open arms, with a newfound sense of hope and resilience. I had learned a valuable lesson, a lesson that had cost me dearly, but a lesson that had ultimately set me free. I had learned that sometimes the greatest love is letting go. And in letting go of Sarah, I finally learned to love myself. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, each one dragging by with agonizing slowness. I threw myself into work with a vengeance, trying to bury the pain, to distract myself from the constant ache in my heart, the emptiness that had taken root in my soul. I worked longer hours than ever before, volunteering for extra projects, taking on new responsibilities, anything to keep my mind occupied, to avoid the silence of my empty apartment, the constant reminders of Sarah's absence. I became a workaholic, a ghost of my former self, a shadow moving through the motions of life, a machine driven by deadlines and deliverables, devoid of joy, devoid of purpose. I lost weight. My clothes hung loose on my frame. My eyes were shadowed with fatigue, my smile a distant memory, a relic of a happier time. My friends worried about me. They saw the toll the breakup was taking on me, but I brushed off their concerns, assuring them that I was fine, that I was just going through a rough patch, that I just needed some time to get back on my feet. But I wasn't fine. I was broken, lost, adrift in a sea of grief and regret, struggling to stay afloat, clinging to the hope that Sarah would throw me a lifeline. One evening, I was working late at the office, as usual, the glow of the computer screen reflecting in my tired eyes, when I received a text message. The notification tone startled me, breaking through the fog of concentration that I had been desperately trying to maintain. I glanced at my phone, and my heart skipped a beat. It was from Sarah. "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow?" it read. The simple question sent a jolt of electricity through my body, a surge of hope, a sudden rush of adrenaline. It was the first contact she had initiated since our encounter at the bar, and it felt like a sign, a glimmer of possibility. I texted back immediately, my fingers trembling slightly. "Yes, of course. Where and when?" "How about the cafe on Oak Street?" 10 a.m., she replied. "Perfect." I typed back, my mind already racing, imagining all sorts of scenarios, all sorts of outcomes. Would she tell me she was ready to come back? Would she tell me she had moved on? Would she tell me she never wanted to see me again? The uncertainty was agonizing, the anticipation almost unbearable. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I imagined all sorts of conversations, all sorts of possibilities. I rehearsed what I would say to her, the apologies I would offer, the promises I would make. I pictured her face, her smile, her eyes, trying to conjure up the image of her that I had fallen in love with, the woman who had filled my life with joy and laughter. But the image was blurred, distorted by the pain and the regret, by the weight of the past. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe early, my nerves on edge, my stomach churning with anticipation and dread. I ordered a coffee and sat at a table by the window, watching the people pass by, trying to distract myself from the thoughts that were swirling in my mind, the emotions that were threatening to overwhelm me. I felt like I was waiting for a job interview, or a doctor's appointment, or some other momentous occasion that would determine the course of my future. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, looking beautiful as always. She was wearing a simple dress that accentuated her figure, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes bright, but there was a hint of nervousness in her expression, a slight hesitation in her movements. She smiled tentatively, a small, hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a smile that was a far cry from the radiant smile she used to greet me with. "Hi, Daniel," she said, her voice soft, almost tentative. "Hi, Sarah," I replied, my voice hoarse, betraying my anxiety. We sat in silence for a moment, the awkwardness palpable, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy in the air between us, like an invisible barrier. "How are you?" I finally asked, the question that had been on my mind for months, the question that I had been dying to ask her. I'm doing okay," she said, her voice hesitant, her eyes darting away from mine. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of soul-searching. I've been trying to figure out who I am, what I want from life, what I need to be happy." "And?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, as if trying to gauge my reaction, my expectations, trying to prepare me for what she was about to say. "I've realized that I need to make some changes in my life," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I need to focus on myself, on my own happiness, on my own well-being. I need to be true to myself, to my own needs, to my own desires." I felt a pang of disappointment, a sinking feeling in my stomach, a premonition of what was to come. I knew, deep down, what she was going to say, but I still clung to the hope that I was wrong, that I had misinterpreted her words. "I've met someone," she continued, her voice soft, almost apologetic, but her eyes unwavering, her expression resolute. "Someone who makes me feel alive, someone who sees me, who understands me, someone who appreciates me for who I am, not for who he wants me to be." The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the wind out of me. I felt a wave of nausea, a sudden dizziness, the room spinning around me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg her to come back to me, to tell her that I would change, that I would be the man she wanted, that I would do anything for her. But I couldn't. I just sat there, numb, my heart breaking into a million pieces, the reality of her words crushing me. "I'm happy for you," I finally managed to say, my voice hollow, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, a bitter acknowledgement of my defeat. I just want you to be happy." It was the truth, or at least a part of it. I didn't want her to be happy, even if it meant that she couldn't be happy with me. But the thought of her being happy with someone else, of her finding love and fulfillment with another man, was like a knife twisting in my heart. She smiled sadly, a mixture of gratitude and regret in her eyes. "Thank you, Daniel," she said, her voice soft, almost compassionate. "That means a lot to me." We sat in silence for a few more minutes, the unspoken words hanging heavy between us, the weight of our shared past, the pain of our present, the uncertainty of our future. Then she got up to leave, her movements decisive, final. "I should go," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I have to meet him." I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with emotion. She leaned down and kissed me on the cheek, a light, fleeting kiss that felt like a goodbye, a final farewell. "Take care of yourself, Daniel," she said, her voice soft, almost tender. "I'll always care about you." And then she was gone,